Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1168th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Vincent Valdez and Max Tolleson. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Vincent Valdez blends large representational paintings, the scale of which recall Western traditions of history paintings, as well as mural painting and cinema, with contemporary subject matter. He focuses on subjects that explore his observations and experience of life in the 21st century. The results are powerful images of American identity that confront injustice and inequity while imbuing his subjects with empathy and humanity. Valdez states, "My aim is to incite public remembrance and to impede distorted realities that I witness, like the social amnesia that surrounds us all." He lives and works in Houston and Los Angeles. And our host today, Max Tolleson, is a critic in residence at the CORE program in Houston, Texas, and has published scholarship and art criticism with ArtNet News, ASAP-J, Glass Tire, and Panorama. While living in Marfa, Texas, he researched and wrote about the history of the Chinati Foundation in relation to minimalism, environmental theater, critical regionalism, and the politics of display. He has presented his research at the Getty Foundation and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Max received a PhD in art history from the University of California, Los Angeles in 2023, and was a 2022-23 Helena Rubinstein Critical Studies Fellow at the Whitney Independent Study Program here in New York. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Max to get us started.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for that wonderful introduction. I also want to thank Min Park for her assistance today, putting everything together, the slides. All of you at the Brooklyn Rail, you've been very indispensable. Thank you so much. And Vincent, I want to say first, congratulations on your retrospective. It's incredible. There's so much work there. It's like, wow. For those of you who haven't seen it, there's over 4 decades, I think, of work in the exhibition. I mean, I've seen the show now 6 or 7 times, and I'm always blown away by discovering new elements, especially in the basement room of the Contemporary Art Museum, where there are these flat files that have drawings from when, Vincent, you were like 5 years old, 6 years old. I mean, this is really a retrospective if you think about it. And it's incredible to see the breadth and dynamism of your practice all under one roof. Having seen the show, what's become clear to me is that you have this really deep fascination with issues and experiences that permeate American life. I mean, whether they involve systemic racism and racial violence, or political corruption, patriotism, the questions about democracy and what makes America a democracy, as well as icons of progress and achievement. And my first question for you really is, how does it feel to see so much of your own work all in one place under one roof? For instance, does it seem to you as though your development as an artist has really followed a kind of cohesive and straightforward path throughout these last decades? Or do you feel as though there are distinctions or breaks, changes in themes and techniques of the way you work over the years? What does this retrospective reflect for you?
Well, first, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Thanks to you, Max, and the Brooklyn Rail team and all of the audience with us today. I got to say, if I had to sum it up into one word, it's terrifying. It's a lifetime, really, of this absolute love and commitment for the tradition and the historical legacy of drawing and painting. I have devoted my entire life to this, the idea of making images. As I have been able to go in and out of the exhibition after it opened, it really has been a revelation for me in a way, because it's allowed me one of the few opportunities in my own life and career to become a genuine observer of my work as opposed to being the creator. You know, it's for 40 plus years, it's been very challenging for me to be able to look at work as an observer, you know, somebody from a sort of secondhand perspective, because all I see in these things, you know, I know them so well in and out, every square inch, you know, both physically and mentally. You know, and I always focus on the things like, oh, these are areas I should have fixed, or I could have made this better and improved it. But this has been one of the very first opportunities for me to really think about and closely examine this path, like you're suggesting, Max. You know, the path, the creative path that I've taken over the course of a lifetime. The one thing that has been absolutely unwavering is my role as not only image maker, but as an artist, as citizen, as human being in the 21st century, a close observer of the world around me. This is something that has not ever detoured for me. I don't know that it's something that I will ever separate myself from. You know, I think as a child, my mother always reminded me, be aware of your surroundings. And I took that a little bit too close to heart, I think, and it shows in this lifetime of work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like going back to that question of observer, maker, I mean, there is a way in which your work, as much as it is a reflection of certain observations you see in American society, there's also ways in which your personal autobiographical history is really resonant in these works. And you kind of, I think you thread the needle so well when you think about the way that you blur the allegorical and the autobiographical. For instance, in these works here on the screen, The Strangest Fruit, I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that. For instance, I know that these works refer to a history of lynchings of Mexicans and Mexican American people in the US between, I think, the 1880s and 1930s. But then also you've replaced the victims with people that you know, right? So there's a way in which it becomes very personal at the same time. Can you talk about how and why you made that decision?
Sure, and to go a step further, we notice, you know, these visual markers, you know, of contemporary life in the contemporary world. This is a subject, a historic subject, but retold, re-examined, re-seen through a modern day contemporary lens, you know, 21st century. And so, you know, as an artist, um, it's been extremely important for me to challenge myself in the studio, to find ways to connect with my audience by means of telling my own personal tale and experience of my own lifetime and the things that I've experienced, that I've witnessed, that concern me. But I've also recognized very early on as a younger artist that it was absolutely impossible and not even entirely important that the viewer has a personal connection to me. They don't need to know who I am. They don't need to know my background life story to be able to connect with an image. So now I've found, you know, I've spent year after year trying to construct and frame for myself in the studio ways in which an image can tell multiple stories through multiple perspectives and layers. And almost every image that I create, like the Strangest Fruit series, it has to be informative. It has to speak and connect to history in some way. I feel very strongly about this because of my own previous role as an educator with younger artists, you know, over the course of the last 2 decades. I remember how important books were for me and the idea of education and informing my own self and the ways that information fed into the work and propelled the work forward. And beyond this, in order to not only seduce the viewer through palette and color and lighting and exquisite technique, right? It has to be informative, it has to educate, it has to inform. And then one final step beyond these works must resonate. There must be an undeniable presence to the way that these works, not only in the ways that they look, but in the ways that they make one feel. And so scale is very important to me. The Strangest Fruit series were beyond, these figures portrayed are beyond life size on canvas, levitated on these absent, blank, dissolved, erased backgrounds, no landscape, no histories, no perspective. You, the viewer, get to decide and become an active participant in the retelling of histories, both past, present, and future. You become the decider of their fates or destinies. Are these individuals resurfacing, reemerging from the past into the present and beyond, alive in their memories and their spirit, or will you, the viewer, allow them to dissolve and be forgotten without a trace once again? And so these are the kinds of games that I set up for myself in the studio, and it keeps me interested, it keeps me stimulated, it keeps me excited, it keeps me from getting bored. But I really do approach each one of these concepts like this. It's not the technique, the mastery of the skill that I am pursuing. It's the ideas that I'm forever chasing. The ideas are the heartbeat and the nucleus of anything and everything that I do in the studio.
Well, I'm wondering if we could talk about, I'm curious about this sort of historical sensibility that you have, that you carry with you when you're making. And I'm wondering if there was an early moment in your life that sort of catalyzed for you a kind of political consciousness or awakening where you realized that, art and politics go hand in hand. I mean, for instance, in the flat files, I saw that there was a journal you included, and it shows a picture of a man. I think it's a family member of yours, and it says draft 1970. He's wearing a military uniform, and you wrote that like this was like a moment for you of great significance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You hit it right on the nail, Max. I mean, for me, that is immediately, instantly, the first time in my young life. I'm 4 years old, 5 years old, and my father had these, still has these amazing scrapbooks about his experience of being drafted, sworn in under oath, in San Antonio, Texas at age 20, pulled out of college and sent to Vietnam. And I remember looking at these photographs about this world over there and him describing to me what it felt like, what it smelled like, what he experienced, what he witnessed. And I would ask him questions, pushing back, but not only for the sake of challenging him, but because I was curious. I was absolutely curious. I couldn't understand. I was somewhat confused. But why did you go if you didn't want to go? Like, who made you go, and how is this possible in the United States of America? I was already thinking about these things prematurely. A story like my father's, paired with what I was gathering from history books, because I didn't have access to art books in my household, much less in the classroom at school. But my parents always had in their living room these built-in wall shelves. Every year they would get, there used to be door-to-door salesmen selling encyclopedias, almanacs of that year in American history. And I would look at these books as if they were art books, images paired with text, historical text. So I was learning a lot about the Vietnam War and the injustice of this war. A few years later, my very first field trip in elementary school, I think first or second grade, was to that notorious place in the center of San Antonio, Texas, the Alamo. And I remember the myth and the preparation that was sort of being, drilled into us in the classroom, learning about Davy Crockett and these Texan heroes and the idea of independence and freedom. I was very excited because it had become such a mythological, concept to me. And I remember walking into the Alamo with my classmates, and about 30 of them went left, and I was completely frozen in my tracks. I had seen for the very first time this epic, monumental 15-foot canvas, an oil painting. And it was in all of its glory and drama and violence, the scene, the Battle of the Alamo. I was blown away. Like, how do you paint like this? I mean, how is something like this created? At the same time, it became, my first introduction into this sort of identity crisis, because there was another part of me that recognized very deeply, was moved by the fact that I was observing that all of the dead guys on the canvas looked just like me. They looked like my cousins, my neighbors, my friends at school. And I was very confused. And I remember that school bus ride back, all the kids were laughing and, singing, doing whatever. And I was sitting there very quietly on the bus, just trying to figure out, but what does this mean? Like, well, how do I fit into this role in the world and this place that I call home? And, and so these two moments, very early premature moments for me, really got me overanalyzing and thinking very quickly about what it meant to be an American, and how that differed from generation to generation, region to region, and so forth.
And then, of course, like, you get really involved in making these large scale paintings that really flip the script on what you just described. Like, I'm thinking of the portrait of Michael Jordan doing like the slam dunk,
Sure.
like that painting of like, I'm going to make this giant painting of a figure that I want to see and care about. I mean, like, I'm just like, it's like, you start to, it seems to me like you start to kind of get involved in understanding the what is it, the conventions of art making, history paintings, and how they tell stories and whose stories they tell. And I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe this particular work, for instance. Like, can you say, like, for instance, it was a very good year, 1988. What does that title mean to you?
So the title is based after Frank Sinatra's famous song, A Very Good Year. But you couldn't have timed this better in terms of bringing up stories like moments for me, like my dad's draft photographs, and then fast forwarding to this image, which is one of my most recent that I just completed this past fall. I spent a year and a half working on these images, but the idea about it was a very good year as a series. This is the first pair in what will eventually become a monumental new series for me. It becomes my own reflection, my recollection of looking back on my own personal timeline in life at the very specific moments that changed or shaped my perceptions about American identity. So I remember being 10 years old, watching these two scenes unfold on my mother's television screen with my younger brother Daniel. On the screen, we see a young Michael Jordan, that moment, one of the most important in all of American and human sports history. This godlike, levitated figure that just sort of soars and floats up in the center of this, also a mythological symbol, powerful symbol within contemporary America of the spectacle, the arena, entertainment, the television screen. Look at the format of the widescreen, canvases. These things are massive. The reason that I've placed them back to back is so that you, the viewer, when you go to Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North on the backside, who is depicted in that moment where he's swearing under oath on national and global television, lying under oath during the Iran-Contra affair hearings. I remember watching both screens on my mom's TV and going back to school on one day, and everybody talking about Michael Jordan and that slam dunk contest, 1998, a year prior to that, going back to school and talking to my friends about what was unfolding on C-SPAN, and nobody had any clue, what that was about. And so here we see this sort of split personality between America. Both of these united in their arenas of spectacle. Both scenes unfold in the arenas of spectacle. Each one of these individuals has their right hands raised for very different reasons, but the visual codex that I've built here becomes a powerful hierarchy of American symbols, the American flag, symbols of patriotism, nationalism, corporate hierarchy. The idea here is trying to enable viewers today to reflect back, yes, on these historic moments, but construct for their own selves ways in which these frameworks have given birth to America absolutely today in the 21st century, in 2025, right? Hidden images of Ronald Reagan, an American Bible, right? The, the quest here is to, or with works like this, is to have viewers, in hopes that viewers will walk away so moved by these images, affected, can't forget these images, and maybe, just maybe, it'll spark enough curiosity in people to go and dig on their own and inform themselves about these scenes and these narratives that in many ways affect all of our daily lives in contemporary society.
Yeah, there's something about the way you produce these kind of works that's very open-ended or perhaps ambiguous to a certain extent, that allows for the viewer to decide on their own, make choices about how they confront them. And one question I had for you is, for instance, the title. You said it's a Frank Sinatra song, and I know that you've used musical songs as titles in other works of yours. Strangest Fruit, a reference to the song made famous by Billie Holiday. There's also So Long, Marianne, another painting of yours. I'm curious what it is about certain pop songs, or is it pop songs in general that you find attractive and perhaps useful in your work? And how do songs work for you in organizing these tableaux?
I think for two reasons, Max. I mean, for me, music um, is the only company I keep in the studio. It is for over a lifetime, right? Painting murals on the scaffolding, sitting in an isolated studio. Music is the thing that keeps me going, right? It's like having a conversation, not only between myself and the music, but between the music and the work. And so over the years, I've deployed specific song lyrics and titles uh, as labels for these paintings, as introductions almost. For me, I think that its music is the message, is the ultimate message to the masses throughout time. It marks a moment in time. It marks specific memories for the masses, right? And so if I can lure you in with a title that is already semi-recognizable to you because you know that song, you know that musical artist, then immediately that's one way of keeping your attention. But beyond this, it I think in a way becomes kind of support structure, right? When I look at a title like Just a Dream, which is an early 1953 song by Jimmy Claxton, um, really used widely, famed in the lowrider Chicano oldies world. In my own mind, when I'm composing these images, because the music is always playing constantly, I look at these images and they play out like soundtracks. And in this case, this painting of this semi-defeated boxer here, there's actually a sound component that echoes from behind the canvas, where you hear this distorted, almost melting, lucid, fading echoes of this historic song. But music is such an important, I admire so deeply the way that musicians are able to reach massive audiences in ways that a painter could only dream about. Musicians become the megaphone, the amplified voices of the people, especially during times of struggle. And for this reason, I feel very deeply connected to music.
And I think you have musicians in your family, am I right? Like you painted a portrait of is it your grandfather in Recuerdo, the painting in the show?
Yes, my grandfather was an amateur conjunto player, Tex-Mex accordion player, and dreamed of being a Flaco Jimenez. And I have this early photograph, I think in one of the flat files that I included of him in the 1930s playing on his back porch. But again, for me, an image like recuerdo, which translates in Spanish, in English, meaning remembering. I use my personal stories and experiences um, only as a springboard. And I painted a work like this when I was in my junior year at the Rhode Island School of Design. Couldn't fly home for Thanksgiving break and was isolated in the studio alone, which was the most important experience of my life at that moment in time because I was missing home. I was missing grandma's, cooking. And this is the very first image that, in many ways, uh, was born, gave birth to works like the Zoot Suit Riots and everything after. This was the first moment for me in the studio where I thought, this is it. Like, this is my voice. This is my vision. I have something to say that is not only important to me, but it is recognizable to a community that doesn't really exist historically in the art world, in contemporary American life, in mainstream life. And beyond that, it had a unique kind of vision that I felt was completely and entirely my own. And yeah, I remember very distinctly making this work, and I just thought, this is it. There is no going back. This is exactly the path, the beginning of the path that I need to be on.
And I see, that makes total sense to me because later works that are in the show, they also incorporate your life and not biography, but and also in these kind of ways you describe as more like not the end goal, but a kind of stepping stone towards a larger discourse. I'm thinking of the portraits of the series of the presidents called I forget, is the title 1977?
Since 1977.
Since 1977, yeah. And that series, I mean, the date is significant because it's when you were born, but then the images you've created are, well, they are and they aren't about you, right?
Right. I mean, I think that if I had to describe visually for you the way that I see concepts when they're floating around in my head, it's always imagine like the core, a nucleus, right? The core of an apple, a seed. This becomes, this is rooted in me. It's my own personal vision and tale. Beyond that, an outer ring would tell the story of my own community, whether that's Chicano, the Chicano community, the Texas community, the American Southwest. Beyond that, an outer ring, it must tell a wider tale about contemporary America. And beyond that, the utmost outer ring would be it has to encapsulate all of us and encompass all of our stories, regardless of your background or your age or your ethnicity. It tells the story about the human condition or the human experience. Each one of these images must function on all levels for me. Otherwise, I find ways of going back to the drawing board and reworking them. And so I put very careful planning and consideration into the ways that I speak to an audience. I do think very deeply and very carefully about my audience, building an audience and who I'm speaking to and what I am saying to this audience, what I'm leaving with them. It's almost, I get asked the question quite a bit, but this work is very heavy, intensive work. It's very dark work in some ways. And I always counter that with saying, I really don't view these works in this kind of fashion or manner. For me, these works, yes, they are intensive, but the beauty, the power, the real power in them is in their ability to speak about what it is to be human. Our story of resilience, persistence, our ability to dream, our ability to fight for something that is right or something towards something that is better. These are ways that that I'm absolutely still convinced that the power of an image can speak volumes and endlessly about the human condition. I mean, this is, for this reason, we are still moved by paintings, drawings and paintings from 500 years ago, a cave, an image on a wall inside of a cave, from 1,000 years ago. I really mean it when I say that as primitive and as archaic as drawing and painting tools can be, there is something about them that remind us all that being human um, means that we all have the ability and are all rooted in our ability to communicate, to be observers of our own, of the world that we share. Yeah.
To ask you, speaking on that last subject about the kind of ability of drawing as an observer, as a form of interaction with the world around you, there are a lot of drawings in this exhibition in the bottom floor, and some of these drawings, particularly, I was thinking about when we were just talking now about the drawings you made in South Texas of the border and the way in which in one of those cases, at least, your drawings of Border Patrol agents, that drawing gave you access to a place that could not be photographed. There were signs that said you can't document this place photographically, and drawing gave you access to experience that surrounding and convey it to others. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that kind of ability that drawing can convey and those series.
I was standing in that place in that time and place with a series of about, I think, 25 high school students from San Antonio who were taken down there by their two instructors who were artist friends of mine and invited me to jump in with them. And I'll never forget standing there observing a section of this, rusted out, like, monumental, intimidating looking wall. It almost looked like spikes coming out of the ground. And immediately the two agents, jumped into their squad car and raced down towards myself and these kids, and immediately started barking at these kids. If we catch any of you taking photos, it's automatic. It's a federal offense. We will call you in. And it was really an empowering moment to observe these students questioning these authorities with really legit questions, about how and why they felt that the wall was necessary, what purposes a border served, hypocrisies about border policies and immigration laws in America. And so I remember looking to these students and said, okay, well, you can't take photographs, but nobody said anything about drawing. And so I encouraged each one of them to open their notepads, and we all started drawing what we were seeing. And, but these images, drawing for me is such an important practice inside the studio. I am absolutely in love with drawing. The immediacy, there's something about the immediacy and the honesty of drawing that I find it differs in ways from painting as a medium. But drawing really feeds straight into these larger scale, painted works that inform almost everything that I do inside the studio.
And I wanted to ask you about your collaboration with Ry Cooter and how were you already living in Los Angeles at that time, or how did your involvement with Ry get started?
I was living in San Antonio in 2004. I was about to complete a large body of giant drawings titled Stations for my very first museum show. And this funny guy kept calling me and leaving me voice messages on my answering machine. And for months, I never called this guy back because I was so focused on trying to meet my exhibition deadline. After I opened that show, I called right back, and he had this grand vision about the tale and the history of the Chavez Ravine neighborhood concerning the three Mexican American communities, La Bishop, La Loma, and Palo Verde, that were all overtaken by eminent domain, and the city of Los Angeles in 1959, where all the residents were pushed out and their homes were destroyed. The ravine was filled with concrete, and this is where Dodger Stadium sits today. I thought Rye was absolutely insane. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew immediately this was something that I wanted to be involved in because of not only the story, but because of his vision. I believed in it, and I said, I'm in. We can figure out all the rest later. I moved out to Los Angeles in 2004 or 5, and I spent 2 years hand painting in oil paints on a 1953 Chevrolet Good Humor ice cream truck built by the Duke's Car Club. The reason that it is this wraparound scene unfolds on an ice cream truck is because in America, the universal symbol for American public life, that the individuals that wander into and out of every single American community, regardless of class, is the mailman and the ice cream man. And so it was a really grandiose vision that was a big undertaking on my part. But in many ways, this project gave birth to what is now kind of a normal tradition of working, in which I am averaging about a year or more per project at this point.
Yeah, I heard or I read that another one of your works in this, or a series of works called The City, took you over a year to complete. I think that was another one that was just a very long-term project for you. And my question about that was, what do you do to take care of your hands when you're painting for so long? I mean, like how do you maintain physically, mentally? I mean, physically, the kind of like health of your hands, but also mentally. I mean, with the subject matter depicted here, how do you psychologically maintain a kind of I don't know, certain kind of sanity?
I mean, I think that it's an important thing for to remind all artists, but especially young artists, right? One of the biggest challenges throughout your creative paths is, as you get older, right? Sure, the physical endurance changes, right? Your feet can't stand as long. Your neck starts to hurt, your fingers, your eyesight, of course. But for me, it's the mental endurance that I've really learned to develop a high endurance when it comes to these marathon art projects. It's at the very beginning stages of any work, regardless of scale. It's exciting to see something being born, right? To give it birth, to see it taking shape. Oh, it's so exciting! I can't wait to get in here. I work all night. Every day. In those first few weeks, and then it's the reality of it. Then you hit a certain point where you develop it enough that you know what it's going to look like, and then you just have to get from that. Now you are in the halfway phase, and you have to get to the finish line, and that's where it becomes work. This is where the challenges really start to set in. If you don't have the discipline, the endurance, and the patience is absolute key in reaching that finish line. I mean, I picture that finish line. And so in a work like The City, I remember being 6 months in and realizing, God, there is no end in sight here. It just kept growing I kept adding panels, I kept adding detail, I kept getting so lost in like telling these stories and building these worlds. And at a certain point, I just couldn't finish. And but you wake up every day and you try not to think about it and you chip away. You try to eat well, you try to get plenty of rest, and you try to stay mentally stable enough so that you can get up and report into work the next morning. And you really do have to learn over time to tackle it, to construct it like a job. Because in many ways, that's precisely what it is, a job. It's getting up, showing up to work, especially on the days that you do not want to be there. And this happens for artists too. And I think over time, my patience and my endurance has shifted in many ways, and I'm learning now how to learn to approach the next chapter and phase of my life or career, um, but you just go with the flow and you trust in the work. That's all you can do. Trust in the ideas, trust in the work.
Well, speaking of, since we're talking about the city, maybe we can look at it a little more closely. This depiction of hooded figures standing in front of a city background. I was wondering, I mean, I've read before that you were inspired in part by Philip Guston and his work reflecting the Klan. I was wondering if you also had become aware of Trenton Doyle Hancock's work about the Klan. I mean, he's a figure who lives in Houston, I think, and you also lived in Houston. Did you ever encounter his work as well?
I mean, sure, Trenton and I, we've met a few times, and I definitely am aware of his work. We are contemporaries. I created this piece when I was in San Antonio, and originally the idea was sparked after I saw Guston's 1969 city limits painting at the Blanton Museum, which is the University of Texas in Austin, as part of an exhibition titled Witness. But I had this idea, I'd been carrying around this idea for about 10 years since I was in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And something about, the images or the symbolism of that white hood. But I just didn't know what I was going to do with it, and in many ways, for many ideas, I carry them around with me for a period of time. I give them time to sit and germinate and develop on their own. And in this way, it becomes its own filtering process. If I don't remember, if I forget the idea after 3 to 5 years, then it wasn't meant to be. But this idea just kept haunting me. And when I saw Guston's painting, it reminded me, there it is. I saw this vision. And it also sparked or re-sparked my own memory, of being confronted by the Klan in front of the Alamo in downtown San Antonio when I was about 16 or 17 years old. I had suppressed that memory. I remember walking out of my day shift at AMC movie theaters making nachos and popcorn one Saturday afternoon. I walked out of River Center Mall. Um, you know, fool, Foolishly, I saw police tape, but I don't know. I didn't think about it. I went past it and was spit out right into the center of a white nationalist rally that was taking place. And almost immediately, they began circling me like sharks, with these fins. And I remember this central guy without the hood that's depicted here in the center of the image. I remember somebody very similar to him, very tall, holding an American flag. I remember staring at this beautiful dragon patch that was embroidered on his hood, on like a silk red hood. And he leaned over and very quietly whispered, "You don't belong here." And wow, it just really, in many ways, just melted my brain, and I turned around and I walked back into the mall. Not alarmingly, I wasn't frightened. I remember feeling so confused, like, what does that mean? I don't belong here. What is this situation? Like, how is this present day America? And so yeah, the idea of the city as a painting is I try to emulate, to describe for you, the viewer, what it felt like to be confronted in this face-off, a staring contest between um, the collision of two worlds, two mentalities, two ideologies, right? That feeling in America that in some ways we are all uninvited guests, right? And um, and so originally, like I said, it started off as a an homage to Philip Guston and to Gil Scott-Heron and his song "The Klan" from 1983. And then after the first month, this thing grew in scale, and even in terms of concept, it grew far beyond what I ever imagined. And at that point, I had just become a mere passenger and was allowing this thing to take me wherever it needed to go.
Mm. Um, yeah, I'm curious about a part of this series includes the New Americans. Am I right about that? And there's a way in which I was very curious about that aspect of the series. It comes um, because I think that the full title is something like maybe you can help me out, Vincent.
Sure. So the city gave birth to and became a trilogy titled "The Beginning Is Near: An American Trilogy." Chapter 1, The City. Chapter 2, Dream Baby Dream. And I'm currently working to complete the third and final chapter, The New Americans. The New
Yes, and I'm curious, is that part of how are so these New Americans, these are portraits of people that you've selected that are contemporaries, I believe. How are you going about selecting these New Americans, and can you talk about what they mean for you?
Sure. So The New Americans will be a series of 21 portraits, 21 individuals in the 21st century who, in my opinion, are fighting the good fight. These in some these individuals, unknown to each other, are united in their efforts to challenge, to push back, to reshape the American landscape for tomorrow, today. I consider these individuals to be powerful visual metaphors, reminders to us all that there is still plenty worth fighting for. They are like, these individuals are like stubborn pulses in a dying heartbeat. They just won't give in or give up. I've completed the first 5 or 6, and I will eventually just patiently work until I reach 21. But I'm actively searching for and locating these individuals who inspire me, who motivate me, who encourage me to get up every morning and keep fighting a good fight for others, not for fame, not for power, not for profit, but because it's still simply the right thing to do now more so than ever. So, for example, and what you see on the screen is from chapter 2. It's not the New Americans. But for example, one of the New Americans that's already been completed is a young individual by the name of Mr. Checkpoints. Mr. Checkpoints in 2010 or 11 um, would fill his backpack with loose change and walk around the streets of Santa Monica, his community, all day looking for expired parking meters. He started to get a lot of attention for being a good Samaritan. And then the Santa Monica Police Department started cracking down on him and harassing him for doing this good deed. He was wrongfully arrested in 2012, I believe, and inside of his jail cell had this epiphany, a life-changing moment for him, where he decided and recognized that not everybody was in the privileged position that Checkpoint was because his father was a high-powered attorney. But what about the individual who gets an expired parking meter, something as simple and as meaningless as an expired parking meter, can't afford to pay that ticket. That ticket turns into a warrant. Those warrants turn into jail, and it just keeps, these individuals keep getting devoured by the American judicial system. So he vowed to spend the rest of his life's effort trying to fight a good fight for others, helping ways. Now he's created the hashtag that's now global at this point, always film the police, AFTP. I encourage you to look him up, doing some good work. And so he's but one example, but I decided to end this ongoing trilogy with the New Americans because it was my own way of examining and carefully questioning my own self. So where do we go from here? what do I leave not only behind in the world, but what do I leave with you, the viewer, in terms of optimism, of encouragement to get up and keep fighting. And so much like this portrait of my grandparents, the New Americans, there's a real sense of defiant resilience, pride, strength in community. I'm not really searching for celebrities or people who already have existing platforms of power. I'm looking for ordinary, regular people.
That's wonderful to hear about. I didn't really understand before. Like I remember in the show, there's a portrait of Teresita Fernandez. There's a portrait of Adriana Corral. Um, yeah, these are people part of the New American series that you're describing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and they're people that I cross paths with in some way in my own personal life, or I somehow learn about them and then connect with them. It's important that each one of these individuals become active participants in the telling of their own histories, and I have them select their own backgrounds. So, like Teresita Fernandez, you saw the drawing, but the large oil portrait of her, she's standing in her backyard in Brooklyn. Um, where she uses a lot of her wood firing techniques in her own work, and then used it for the fence that wraps around her studio and home.
But I think optimism comes through in your work in other ways too, more subtle, perhaps formal ways. You use I was thinking about some of the atmosphere that you create in these paintings. I'm thinking of, for instance, Eton. There's a strange way in which in that painting you use sfumato in this really interesting way that sort of becomes confrontational but also ambiguous. And I feel like ambiguity is maybe one of your techniques for creating sort of creating a kind of sense of provocation for the viewer, maybe like a way to react or respond to something in some way, not just kind of passively absorb.
Yeah, no, it is not my business to spoon feed anybody. I have no interest in that. And uh, a a mystical or mythical, mysterious, ambiguous, not only technique, but um, feeling around each one of these images. There has to be a way to keep your attention there, keep you working, and all in the hopes of promoting critical thought, right? And it's the critical thought that keeps these works grounded, keeps them present in your own memory so that you continue this search not only for what's unfolding in these images in front of you, but your own sort of search and quest for a closer look in your own lives and in your own world, right? Pay attention. These answers are all around us, sometimes right in front of us, but because of the haze or the fog of social amnesia, that hangs over all of our heads at this point and moment in time, it's very difficult to remember, to look closely, to question, and to re-examine.
And of course, in the show, there are certain writers that come up for you as well, like George Orwell or Kurt Vonnegut, whose own kind of science fiction creates a kind of opportunity for critical thinking, for questioning authority, for examining the powers that be and what their real motivations might be.
Right. I mean, an image like this is, completely in line with Orwell's 1984, or more closely, Animal Farm. Right. This is Animal Farm for the 21st century, more darker, more sinister than ever. Right. We've become these mutated, deformed versions, unrecognizable versions of our own selves when staring in the mirror into the abyss as a collective society, devouring everyone. The system has devoured everyone and everything in its path. And so when I look at a portrait like this creature in Eton, you get to decide, well, wait a minute, has this Frankenstein-esque mutated monster devoured a human being? And I see traces of fingers and a foot hiding under him? Or is this thing the new metamorphosis, Kafka's metamorphosis? Have we shed our own abilities and our skins, whether that means physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and we've all become these monsters that we can no longer even recognize in the mirror. And again, that's where I leave it to you, the viewer, to insert your own self and your own experiences and decide for yourself, take a stand, make a decision. It has to engage the viewer in this way.
Right, like, is this the future we want to have, or do we want to choose another option? It seems like you're in. Is this a good time to open it up for questions, or should we continue?
We can definitely open it up for questions. Do you want to ask a last question, Max, or you want me to start questions and then you can kind of close the Q&A with the question?
Sure, why don't we do that?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you both so much for this dialogue to this point, which has been such a pleasure to listen to. We have several audience questions that have come in, and the first one is from Lizette, who has asked me to ask on their behalf. Are there any books, archives, or websites that you'd like to share with us that really influenced the development of your artistic techniques, Vincent, or the melding of politics and cultures in your work? And generally, Lizette says, thank you to the Rail team, Max and Vincent, for putting this wonderful event together.
Ooh, that's a great question. I like that question. A range of some titles that I'll spit out for you. I always start with, for basics, Howard Zinn, the great Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Even just the first opening 5 pages taken from Columbus's diary will melt your brain. I mean, just completely alter and shake up your perception of what you think you might know. Frank Miller's, anything that the great graphic novelist Frank Miller created during his lifetime. As a kid, titles like The Dark Knight, Ronin, for me, were really very closely examined. I studied a lot of those drawing techniques from the comic book world. What else is there? I've recently been listening to, I think his first name is John Lomax, Lomax, and his archives, his fantastic archives, specifically his recordings of young Woody Guthrie and Woody Guthrie's experiences and tales about America and America's struggles in the 1930s and 40s in terms of unions and laborers, working classes, etc. One last one. Let's see. One of my favorite books of all time. I gotta say, I'll go with a classic, Blade Runner, which is really titled "Can Electric Sheep Really Dream?" Really great, especially to read it at a moment like this. Hello America by J.G. Ballard is fantastic as well. Really will get your mind moving in terms of imagination, memory, and so forth.
Thank you for that plethora of amazing things to read and listen to, Vincent. And thank you for that question, Lizette. The next question is from J. Jahari Palacio. They are wondering, some of your work, Vincent, reminds them of murals in Los Angeles that they saw as a teen. Does street art graffiti influence your work?
Well, thanks for your question. I started off as a young muralist when I was 9, 10 years old. In the city of San Antonio, Texas, I spent all of my entire youth sitting up on those scaffolds, 2, 3 stories high under the hot Texas sun. But I was very much influenced and proud to be a part of the historic legacy of Chicano murals. I didn't have access back then. This was pre-internet days, so I didn't know about the legacy of East Los Angeles and Chicano murals in California until I got older. But what an amazing and important part of American history. the idea about murals and who they're for in the communities really forever changed the way that I saw the world and gave me purpose in what it was that I wanted to fulfill as an artist. And I'm forever grateful. It's an amazing thing to see uh, that this legacy continue, the tradition of murals continues to this day, including with street art and artists, and support your community artists. It's needed now more than ever.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer, Vincent. I have a question. I'm curious how you decide compositionally what to leave finished and unfinished. I feel like you have such an interesting way of filling up a composition, and so that it almost feels like it's overflowing at times. And then other times, like in the presidential drawings, there's this restraint that speaks so much to a distance between you and who you're drawing. And I'm curious how you make those decisions, if they come at the beginning or if they come later, often when you're in the middle of something.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that it sort of it mainly depends on the idea that I'm trying to speak. And so in something like The President Heads, that void, that abyss becomes more important than the portraits themselves, the feeling of uncertainty of what comes next in history. Um, but other times, like other works like The City, where everything's jam-packed, I'm utilizing as much space within 40 feet of canvas that I possibly can. A lot of it just depends on not only the concept, but the momentum of where that concept is heading. And so there's been images in the past where I thought they were going to be blank backgrounds, and then they completely shift along the way and they become jam-packed with too much detail. So, it's a fine balance between the two that is a forever occurring game in the studio between myself and these works. But in the end, uh, the creative spirit always wins out and gets to dictate what it needs to do in the end.
Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Sufi in the audience is wondering if you've ever had an exhibition in Northern Europe. They say, amazing work, Vincent. Great to see your work, and especially that you're reflecting over what's happening in society. Much respect from Sweden.
Oh, good to hear from you from across the pond. Unfortunately, no, I have never had a show overseas or in New York, so I am ready. Whoever's listening, let me know. I'll be there.
Amazing. Thank you for that question, Sufi. And one of the last questions today is going to be from Fong, and then I'll pass it back over to you, Max.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Max. Congratulations on the show.
Thank you.
And I don't know whether it had been asked already, brought up, but looking at some of the monochromatic painting, and immediately brought to mind the work of Mark Tansey, an artist who hasn't been really in some form of visibility lately, but I know his work was important to Arthur Danto in the use of monochromatic and the way that it set up some form of polemical dialogue with history without being nostalgic. So I wonder whether you ever thought of Mark's work, Tansey's work, but also to the fact that when leading to Guernica being commissioned, Picasso had in mind immediately that it has to be painted in black and white. Can you imagine Guernica painted in color? It would have different implication altogether. So I'm wondering, those black and white, Vincent, the monochromatic, um, of course, must have some form of longer meditation that how to make it in such manner. So can you share with us? Those choice had to be made very
Sure.
deliberately.
It's amazing to hear you bring up Mark Tansey I remember first coming across his work during an art history slideshow at RISD, and I never forgot, seeing that work and feeling moved by it because of his, the masterful skill. Guernica, I remember encountering that piece in person for the very first time, earth-shattering for me. However, my choices in the studio to work monochromatically really genuinely is rooted in film. Um, I, as a kid, was so drawn to black and white film, so moved by, these old movies, but mostly by watching old footage of 1940s, 1950s boxing fights. And I fell in love with just the lush, velvety blacks and those gray tones and the dramatic, the chiaroscuro lighting and the smoke filled atmospheres of the arenas. Oh, it just affected me in such a way that when I was looking at graphic novels and comic books, I saw them go hand in hand. And, I just love that film noir effect, the lighting. I remember watching, filmmakers like Martin Scorsese's earlier films or Stanley Kubrick's,
Yeah, yeah.
and, it really was everything that I needed in terms of like they were moving paintings to me. And yeah, and so it's something, the black and white palette for me, I believe it can be as sophisticated as any color palette out there if it's done correctly. If you really understand the capabilities of two pigments, you can really make them as powerful and as exquisite and as seductive as any color pigment that works. And but yeah, I appreciate your question.
Well, that's answered very squarely. So thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Vincent. Thank you. Back to you, Chloe.
Thank you for that question, Fong, and for that answer, Vincent. Max, I'm going to pass it back over to you. And while you ask your question, Vincent, I'm going to I would encourage you to set up sound for our surprise conclusion.
Got it.
So Vincent, I guess my last question, something that was brought up in the Q&A, is the fact that you began as a muralist in a lot of ways, making art in public spaces. And I'm curious, over time, you've now looking at this exhibition in Houston, there are these very large scale oil paintings. And I'm curious how venue affects the way that you make and display your work, because on a certain level, like your ambitions, your ideas, your objectives haven't changed, it sounds like, from what you're saying. But then the medium changes sometimes, and also the institutional context in which your work is displayed has changed too. And I'm curious, like, how you see that, how you respond to that. Like, what do you give much thought to that, or is that sort of not something that comes into play?
No, I do. I mean, I think it's a legit question. I'm not out inside the communities anymore. Working and engaging with communities directly on a daily basis, like I once was. In my youth. But I do work very carefully with institutions that I show at in regards to public engagement within the communities. It's important for me that I find ways as the artist going in and out of various communities around the country, that I find ways to insert myself to these spaces and use this work as a catalyst to spark a conversation that's reflected specifically within a diverse range of people or communities. So for example, right here in Houston, it was really extremely important for me that an exhibition like this launched from Texas. It's my own community. It's the place that I was born and raised. I'm a product of this community. And in many ways, I think I remember early on 4 years ago, there was conversation about the potential that an exhibition like this could start in the Northeast or even on the West Coast. And I remember feeling extremely imperative that it was born here. And then the community of Houston and Texas as a whole sends it out at a moment like this in 21st century America, when the national conversation in many ways still ignores the American Southwest, still ignores the not only the presence but the effects that a region, an economy, a cultural, community like Texas has on the rest of the country today and in the future. And I think that bringing a work like this, from launching it from here and going straight into a major institution and landscape like MoCA in Massachusetts is a chance to continue to find ways to be a bridge, whether that be from here to the West Coast, from here to the East Coast, as a reminder to us all that we are all in this together. What affects me is going to affect you, and so forth. As divisive as we are now finding ourselves as collective American community, there has to be ways, we must actively seek out ways on a daily basis to help remind each other that we really are in this together. We either sink or we swim, and your fight is mine, and vice versa. So yeah, I hope that answers the questions.
Definitely does. Thank you, Vincent.
Sure. Should I go ahead and before we exit, I'd like to offer a small gift to each one of you. Thank you for your time and for listening, for caring, for being interested enough about this work. It really helps to encourage me to get back in the studio and to continue pushing forward. The only thing that I ever wanted to be other than a painter was a classical trumpet player when I was a kid, and I was very good at it, and I was very disciplined about it. And then at the age of 16, I had to get braces. And back in the day, it was the real braces, right? Those big metal ones. And so, but I have continued to play over the years. And so I'd like to offer you a small tune as a reminder. We are not alone in our struggles. Our struggles are nothing new. It's important to pay respect, to give homage, and remember the generations who have come before and who have fought the good fight that I spoke about earlier. We must all find ways of caring for each other and not giving up on one another. And so with that, let me can you hear that? Yeah. Thank you.
Vincent, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much for closing us out with your music. And thank you to you and Max for such a gorgeous conversation today about this show. I encourage everyone in the audience, if you're in Houston, to go see the show, and it will open at MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts in May, if you are on the East Coast and want to see it then. And thank you again to Vincent, to Max. Thank you to the team at CAM for all of your support in making today's event possible, and for those beautiful installation views of the exhibition. Thank you to Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor this program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, which is on YouTube and where this conversation will be shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years, and you can support our work through a donation. There's a link in the chat where you can do that. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Aisha Williams and Salome Asega about the brilliant work of the Laundromat Project. And as is Rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much. And thank you to Max and Vincent again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Vincent. Thank you, Max.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Vincent.
Thank
you,
Beautiful
Max.
performance.
That was
Thank you,
you.
Vincent. Congratulations, Vincent.
Congrats.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks so much.
Go see the show, everybody.
Take care.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Absolutely. Thank you.
Max.
Thank you. Bye.